Remember when Thursday nights on NBC was must-watch TV?
First on Friends, Caroline shows up to meet Ross's son.
Where's your baby?
Let's go back.
Tamagotchi,
of Y2K.
The 95 Chicago Bulls, the 72 Miami Dolphins, Batman and Robin, Laurel and Hardy, Eric Clapton, and cocaine. What do all these things have in common? They make for great teams. I wanted to talk about a great team that is often overlooked, but was just as dominant as any other team I listed. On this channel I've spoken a lot about ABC's TGIF lineups throughout the 1990s. However, there's one television lineup from that decade that blows TGIF away in terms of numbers. TGIF, like me, may be number one in your heart, but let's take a look at the real dominant lineup from the 90s and possibly the greatest television lineup of all time. Thursday nights on NBC was touted as must-see TV in the 90s, and it was just that for many households. Even if you didn't watch the entire lineup of shows, there was probably one show that you didn't miss. The peak was the 1995-96 season for NBC. The shows vacating those time slots were juggernauts in their own right. You had Friends, Seinfeld, and ER. Now let's take a look at the highest rated television shows from that season on all channels and all weeknights. Number 1 was ER, sitting at a 22.0 rating, Seinfeld holds second place with a 21.2 rating, and Friends in third with an 18.7. If we go further down the list, number 4 is Caroline in the City, also airing on NBC on Thursday nights, and The Single Guy at number 6, which only aired in the fall and winter, and Boston Common hitting the number 8 spot after only airing in the spring. The powerhouse of Seinfeld, Friends, and ER took shows like The Single Guy and Boston Common and put them in the top 10 shows for that year, despite being cancelled just because they aired within that lineup. That means in the top 8 highest rated shows of that season, NBC's Thursday nights held 6 of those spots. For me personally, I only ever watched Friends at the time of its airing. Seinfeld I watched later on in life, and ER I've probably only seen a handful of episodes. I have strong memories of watching Friends with my family. I distinctly remember going to a teacher-parents meeting at my school one night and all of us rushing home to watch Ross's wedding. These shows felt more like events to many people. Some of us finding ourselves around the water cooler at work or cafeteria in school on Friday morning discussing the bet on Seinfeld, or talking about Jeannie Boulet's HIV diagnosis on ER. This is what made it must-watch TV. If you missed an episode, you had to wait for a rerun, and you'd be a social outcast for at least a week. Or maybe that was just me in school. Anyway, with streaming service taking over our television screens, something like this will most likely never happen again. So I want to look back at this time in television history and see how it even came to be. Now I know there are probably a lot of Caroline in the City fans out there, but for this specific video I'm going to be looking at the big three. And in order to do that, we first need to go back to 1989, when the little show that could was first conceived. At this point in Jerry Seinfeld's career, he had appeared on The Tonight Show about 30 times and Letterman about 30 times. NBC invited Jerry in for a television pitch meeting. At the same time, Larry David was making his rounds in the stand-up clubs and went for a walk with Jerry. The two began discussing what a television show with him at the helm would look like, to which Larry said, "This is what the show should be, just two guys talking." This would later be referenced in the Seinfeld episode The Pitch, and where the show gained its nickname The Show About Nothing. Larry and Jerry left that meeting at NBC with an approved script, unlike their fictional counterparts. They went on to cast Michael Richards as Kramer, Jason Alexander as George, who was essentially a fictionalized stand-in for Larry David. However, Julia Louis-Dreyfus was not yet cast because the original pilot script didn't include Elaine. The pilot episode was filmed in the spring of 1989 and handed over to the NBC research department for testing under the name The Seinfeld Chronicles, and just like that, it was a hit. Okay, not exactly. The test audience had lukewarm reactions with a rating of weak, and killed their chances at a fall pickup. What did NBC pick up instead of Seinfeld, you might ask? Well, it was a show about the day-to-day lives of a staff at a New York hotel called Nut House, starring Cloris Leachman. And if you remember history well, it went on to be one of the greatest American television sitcoms of all time. Well, actually, they filmed 10 episodes but only aired 8. Warren Littlefield, an executive at NBC, loved the Seinfeld Chronicles and decided to make one more push. He convinced the variety department to make one less 2-hour Bob Hope special, and used that money to fund 4 episodes of Seinfeld by billing them as 4 half-hour specials. There was just one note to Larry and Jerry: get a girl. This is when they wrote Elaine into the show and cast Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who Larry knew from his time at Saturday Night Live. Seinfeld debuted on May 31st, 1990 on the summer schedule, which is usually a place where television shows go to die. NBC's biggest show at the time was Cheers, and Seinfeld followed reruns of the show, which were still pulling in large audiences. To NBC's surprise, Seinfeld retained most of the Cheers audience. Suddenly, NBC was all in on Seinfeld. Well, maybe half in, because they ordered 13 more episodes, which is technically half a season. Seinfeld broke the classic sitcom structure, and to stay true to their unique vision, Larry and Jerry fought NBC on the idea to make Elaine and Jerry a married couple. The show was still on rocky ground though. It aired opposite Home Improvement and was beaten by them with an average of 28 shares to Seinfeld's 17. This is what prompted the move to Thursday nights in February of 1993. The new time slot, plus NBC using all their on-air promos during the Super Bowl to promote Seinfeld, paid off as Seinfeld surpassed Cheers in their final season, and the rest is history. Seinfeld would go on to be one of the biggest television shows of all time, and arguably the biggest show of the 90s, and the show is still very much in the lexicon of today's pop culture. Surely there wouldn't be another show that could live up to the impact Seinfeld had on the 90s. Seinfeld and Friends will always be linked and compared to one another like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, which may seem strange since they're vastly different shows. I'm someone who enjoys both, but can understand them having very different audiences. The reason for their link seems to come down to the fact that not only did they air on the same night, but they were both arguably the two biggest sitcoms of the 90s, and that's where we'll begin in 1994. NBC was looking for a show that would target a young urban audience. That's when Marta Kaufman and David Crane came in and pitched a show called 6 of 1. It was a half-hour sitcom about 6 friends living in New York City, and they nailed it. The NBC executives were thrilled and casting began. The first role that was technically cast was Matthew Perry as Chandler. The only issue was he was currently on a show called LAX 2194 about airport baggage handlers in Los Angeles in the year 2194. Courtney Cox showed up and nailed the audition. They offered her the role of Rachel, but she insisted she play Monica because she connected more with that character. Jennifer Aniston was the next choice for Rachel, but just like Matthew Perry, she had already filmed a pilot for a show called Muddling Through. The show was about a woman named Connie who returns home on parole after shooting her husband. Classic comedy plot. Aniston went to the president of CBS, Les Moonves, and begged him to let her out of her contract so she could film Friends. Kaufman and Crane said Phoebe was the easiest to cast. Lisa Kudrow was on Mad About You at the time playing the waitress Ursula, and because Friends was going to air back-to-back with Mad About You, there was no negotiating with another company or division. They later would tie the two shows together by making Ursula Phoebe's twin sister. The night before Matt LeBlanc came in to audition for the role of Joey, he was running lines with his friend and they decided to get more into the role by going out and getting drunk with other friends. That night he woke up to go to the bathroom, blacked out, and fell face first into the toilet and got a large gash on his nose. When he showed up for the audition, it was him and another guy dressed in a full cowboy outfit. He said that he knew one of them had missed the mark and he hoped it wasn't him. When LeBlanc told Kaufman during his audition how he got the scar on his nose, she laughed and he got the part. Ross was the only role that was specifically written with an actor in mind, and that actor was David Schwimmer. Kaufman and Crane had worked on a television pilot called Couples, where they first saw Schwimmer audition. They remembered how much they loved him and he didn't even have to audition for Friends. An offer was sent to his agent, and after some convincing, Schwimmer left his Chicago theater group to come down to do another television pilot, something he had grown tired of doing after seeing show after show not getting picked up. The buzz about Friends was making waves through the television industry even before a single frame had been filmed. Lisa Kudrow spoke about her time on Mad About You as young actors would approach her asking her about the Friends auditions. It wasn't until the first rehearsal that everything and everyone instantly clicked. They felt as though they had a miracle on their hands to cast 6 great actors and for them all to have good chemistry on day one. They knew they had something special. Jimmy Burrows, who had directed shows like Cheers, Frasier, and Taxi, came in and directed the pilot episode of Friends. Before the show's premiere, Burrows took the cast to Vegas and screened the first episode on the plane ride over. With all of them sitting around a table in Vegas, he told them to look around and enjoy the moment, because it would be the last time they would ever be able to all sit together without being swarmed by people. Friends, similar to Seinfeld, didn't begin gaining traction with audiences until the first season of reruns caught people's attention. At the time, there was a similar show on Fox called Wild Oats, but instead of 6 20-something friends living in New York, it was about 4 20-something friends living in Chicago. Funnily enough, it starred Paul Rudd, who would later go on to join the cast of Friends. Then, on January 28, 1996, after the Cowboys beat the Steelers in the Super Bowl, Friends aired an episode featuring Brooke Shields and Jean-Claude Van Damme that pulled in an audience of 140 million Americans. It became the most watched night in television history and skyrocketed the cast of Friends into superstardom, putting Joey's "How You Doin'" and the Rachel into salons and pop culture for decades to come. I don't know, the Billy was more my style. NBC now had the two biggest sitcoms in television airing on Thursday nights, which is a pretty big accomplishment in itself. However, the same year that Friends was in the works, their soon-to-be highest-rated television series was also in pre-production, and America would be introduced to the drama that would captivate audiences for over a decade. In the late 80s, NBC made a hard push to sign Diane Sawyer to their network. However, ABC won that bid. The plan was to give her a 1-hour news show at 10 p.m. Monday to Friday. With her out of the equation, NBC had 5 open 10 p.m. time slots that needed to be filled. In 1993, producer Tony Krantz called filmmaker John Wells and asked him to look through the vaults of Steven Spielberg's company Amblin Entertainment for material that might work for television. What he found was ER, a script that had already been 12 years old but written by Jurassic Park writer Michael Crichton, which at the time was dominating theaters. Back in the 80s, Spielberg was set to direct ER as a feature-length film and now owned the script. NBC set up a meeting with Crichton, Spielberg, and Wells and pitched the idea of turning the ER script into a TV movie, but by the time the meeting ended, they had a 13-episode series on their hands, which would later be cut down to just 6 episodes. Michael Crichton dragged his feet a bit when it came to committing to the series. When he finally gave in, they needed to cast and quickly shoot while on a budget. This is where the Steadicam style of filming came into play. It was cheaper than having a multiple camera setup, but also made you feel like you were part of the action and became a staple of why ER was so captivating at the time. Anthony Edwards was a shoo-in for Dr. Green when he made everyone cry during his casting session. George Clooney's journey to becoming Dr. Doug Ross was much more unconventional than the rest of the cast. Clooney's first leading man role was as Detective James Falconer on the television series Sisters. While on the studio lot, Clooney would give flowers and candy to the assistants to find out who was casting at the time, and that is where he heard about ER. He went up to John Wells and begged him for an audition and refused to leave until he got one. Nowadays, that's just asking to be escorted off the property by security, but he got his audition and nailed it before getting the role on the show. Noah Wyle, before being cast, swore off television and said he would only ever do film. When the script for ER got into his hands, he fell in love with it and figured it was a film because of how big it was. The time between his audition and getting the role was quick. Wiley recalls going to a coffee shop and getting a call that afternoon that he had the part. Juliana Margulies was on a show called Homicide at the time when she auditioned for the role of Carol Hathaway. This wasn't going to be an issue with scheduling because it was just a guest spot. Carol Hathaway in the pilot was meant to die of a drug overdose, but producers loved her so much they said, well, maybe Carol doesn't die, and gave her a choice between Homicide and ER. Clooney called her afterwards and told her it would be silly for her to pass up the opportunity, and just like that, Carol Hathaway lived on. The final piece of the puzzle was Dr. Benton. Producers wanted actor Michael Beach for the role, but something just didn't feel right. Michael Beach's best friend was Eric LaSalle, and he told him all about ER. After reading the script, LaSalle immediately called his agent to set up an audition. When he showed up to the audition in full scrubs and a tougher take on Dr. Benton than Beach, he got the role, the same role that his best friend had auditioned for previously. The cast was all in place, and when handed off to the research department, ER became the highest tested pilot ever. The show had a flow to it where, unlike other doctor-based shows, they wouldn't explain all the technical jargon. Everyone there was in the medical industry, and it would make no sense to explain everything just because the camera was there. They trusted their audience was smart enough to pick up what was going on. The show clashed many times with Don Ohlmeyer, the president of NBC's West Coast division at the time, for this very reason. He also disliked how much blood they showed and believed they would easily get beat by CBS's hospital show Chicago Hope that would be going head-to-head with ER. Side note, Ohlmeyer was also in a clash with the creators of Friends because of a condom being shown on television. Ohlmeyer wasn't alone though. Many people believe Chicago Hope was going to obliterate ER. I mean, they had an episode where they replaced a kid's heart with a baboon's heart. How can you beat that? Promos were run featuring George Clooney uttering the line,
You treat your child like this. He's a little kid.
It made him the first big star from the series as he was seen as a hero before even airing an episode. NBC opted to not go head-to-head with Chicago Hope for their first episode and premiered on Monday night, September 19th, 1994 against Monday Night Football. It's funny to look back and realize all three shows' breakout moments involved football. But football be damned because people tuned in to watch ER, and the next week NBC rolled the dice and went head-to-head with Chicago Hope for the first time. The final score? Chicago Hope 15 million viewers, ER 23 million. Within 6 episodes of airing, the cast was on the cover of Newsweek. With this success, ER found its permanent home on Thursday nights right alongside Friends and Seinfeld. And there you have it, 3 shows who would all hold the top spot of the highest rated series at one point or another. All created for different reasons, one because of a popular star in comedy, one because of young creators with a vision, and one because of a script that blew everyone away. The stars just happened to align for NBC back in the 90s, thanks to these 3 shows that all could have just easily not even made it to a pilot episode. Thanks to some dedicated and persistent people, a little bit of luck, and surprisingly football, NBC's Thursday nights not only became must-see TV, but one of the most impressive lineups in television history. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Which of these shows was a must-see TV in your household growing up? Tell me in the comments below. And for everyone who likes this video, may you never go without soup. Bye everyone.
No soup for you!